Can't even imagine it. Whoa. It's like you're Anakin Skywalker.
Oh
Whoa.
no.
How do you make sense of objective morality?
I think that morals have real being.
What a beautiful checkmate you caught me in.
All the sort of dicey situations that you're parsing through are just because of your threshold of belief. Like it's too high. So I'm here with Jared Smith of Heliocentric. Is it the Heliocentric or just Heliocentric?
No, it's just heliocentric. There is
Okay.
a jazz band called the Heliocentrics, plural.
Okay.
But they're much more talented than me.
And well, there was a kind of a string in the metal world where everything was the something for like about
Yeah.
10 years. And then people kind of got away from it. But so
Mhm.
the heliocentric, not the heliocentric, not the heliocentrics. And that is a sort of your metal project.
Mhm.
Got a couple albums out, and you've also got a series of YouTube videos on
Yeah.
the atheist church audit.
Mhm.
And I've enjoyed watching those for a while. Jared and I have been talking for maybe about a year now on
Yeah.
various mediums, and we finally decided to sit down and chat. We've got lots of common interests, lots of common experiences,
Mhm.
and then some diverging experiences. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you today, and don't have too much by way of plans. But if you have anything you'd like to say about yourself or your projects, you go ahead and do it.
Nah, man. I mean, you nailed it. Yeah, I feel like all this conversation is long overdue. Sorry it took us this long to hop on a call together.
Well, it's also sort of my fault. I've got four kids running around,
Which is
and
crazy to me. How old are
yeah,
you?
33.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So today is a day where they're away. So
Mm.
I got a quiet kitchen.
Sent them to
So
the coal mines.
that's right. Yeah, they're with Nana, so they're happy.
Nice.
And so I think the way that I actually came across you and your stuff is a conversation that you had with Victor Borba.
Oh,
Yeah, so Victor and I have been talking
dude,
for a
that's
while.
crazy.
Yeah,
Wow, that was like the worst conversation I ever did.
really. What
Yeah.
what 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 do you how do you qualify that? What do you think?
Well, so first and foremost, Victor is an insanely talented vocalist. I
Oh,
mean,
fantastic.
I,
Yeah.
I aspire to do a tenth of what he's capable of doing. Um, that conversation though was really like maybe I was in a weird headspace. And then also it was a little um unpredicted, like the way that it ended up going.
Hmm.
Uh, because I was under the assumption that it was just going to be like a, like this, just kind of a one-on-one conversation. But then I hopped on the call and I realized, oh no, it's me and him and like 30 of his Discord followers, like in the chat off to the side. And it was just really, it was like a kind of uncomfortable thing because it felt like they were ganging up on me a little bit or like overly
Interesting. Did
scrutinizing
you
what I was
did you were
saying.
you able to see the chat or
Yeah,
oh
yeah.
okay.
And so it was like I would start making a point and, I would be like half reading some, dude's like 12 paragraph rebuttal in the side while also trying to engage Victor. Um, and I think that no disrespect to him, but I think that he's still pretty new to the faith. Um,
Yeah, sort of like cage stage. Uh
Age stage?
yeah, you ever hear that phrase?
No, 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 no.
Oh, a cage stage is like, yeah, where you first get into something, you're really like super crazy about it.
Yeah.
It's about Nicolas Cage, when he first like kind of broke into he got the crazy, like some crazy movies came out. And yeah, I think, I mean, if I know Victor well enough, I think that's probably he will stay in cage stage.
Mm,
He's a pretty intense guy.
yeah.
But I mean, from my perspective, I was just really impressed with your perspective and sort of the winsomeness with which you handled that
Mm.
conversation. And so yeah, so I reached out to him and got your information, and that's how I kind of found you.
Dude, that makes me really happy that something good came out of that because I was really discouraged afterwards and was like, man, that was a crap show. Like, yeah, I don't know. So I'm glad that Glad that a friendship came out of it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I wouldn't have gathered it from the conversation that you were uncomfortable. So that's good.
Word.
But one of the, I mean, I guess not one of the, pretty much the entire conversation that you had with him revolved around sort of your deconversion. I don't know if you like that word. I don't.
Yeah, yeah. I prefer
And
deconversion over
or
deconstruction.
deconstruction, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's probably what I thought I said. And sort of how that went down. And frankly, I'm not really interested in rehashing
Sure.
the chronology of it and all that. But if you're interested in that, you can go see the terrible conversation that he had on on Victor's channel. I enjoyed it. So there's definitely that stuff on available if people are interested, sort of how that went about.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of picking up from where all that kind of left off, I am interested in sort of your perspectives. I guess that was about a year ago.
Yeah.
And so has anything in your thinking changed since then? While you're thinking, I had something else that I wanted to say, just to kind of frame this conversation, because it should be a fairly foreign conversation to anyone watching, because I'm a Christian and you're an atheist.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing that I've learned about you is that you are not the type of atheist that really wants to make more atheists. In fact, if you want anything, I think you probably want more engaged, more faithful Christians.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to pull people away from their faith.
Yeah.
Which is uncommon in an atheist, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so this conversation gets a little bit tricky when we start talking about things, because I remember even with Victor, you were kind of reluctant to pull the guns out. You're not really trying to. So when we talk about these sorts of issues, first of all, I welcome you to share whatever you're thinking,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I have notoriously been a little skeptical of apologetics. Mm-hmm. I'm not an apologist by any means, but I think one of the things about apologetics that's not so great is that it sort of becomes an arms race of arguments.
Yeah.
It's like who, okay, so an atheist will bring up this argument, or a skeptic or whatever. And then it's like, okay, we have to address that. And until we address that, then there's a problem. And so it becomes like a never ending sort of cycle of arguments, and then assessing the arguments, saying, oh, this one's better than that one. And I just don't like it. So we've come across two people, an atheist that doesn't really want to attack the faith, and a Christian that's not, I don't want to say I don't want to defend the faith, but I definitely want to do it in a very different way than most. Yeah. So that just frames kind of what's going on here. So back to the question.
That seems like a very complementary juxtaposition.
Yeah, we'll see. So in the past year, has anything changed in your thinking, or you pretty much, can I just assume based on the conversation, I kind of got it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm still generally in the same place. You always learn stuff. But as far as my whole framework, I'm an atheist who loves religion by and large. There's a lot of caveats there, but and I'm still a nihilist. So that's kind of the two cruxes of my being. I mean, I've learned a lot of stuff. I've been studying the Gnostic texts probably since the beginning of this year. That's been kind of my new fascination, trying to dive deep into that and make sense of that whole world. But I think that's only further solidified my skepticism regarding the truth claims of Christianity. It hasn't belittled my appreciation for Orthodox Christianity, but it has given me a broader scope for what Christianity is and was throughout the centuries.
Yeah. I don't know too much about the Gnostics as they kind of mixed with Christianity. Yeah. I know what I know about Gnosticism is actually basically what I know about Platonism,
Sure.
and sort of how that morphed into Gnosticism.
Mm.
And so I don't have a lot of sense of sort of how those two things intermingled. But I think the first thing, if everything is about the same,
Mhm.
I think I want to dive in with the idea of atheism, just sort of generally.
Yeah.
Is there a reason that you prefer the term atheist to something like agnostic?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and I've heard a lot of different people debate this. Goodness, I forget her name, but there was a Leslie Hazelton, maybe, wrote a book called, I think it's just Agnosticism, or maybe like the Agnostic Manifesto. And me and my friend who are atheists got to the end of that book, and she's, hailing, agnosticism and skepticism, and kind of keeping certainty at arm's length. She's, putting all of these things on a pedestal and saying, this is why, I champion being an agnostic. And I got to the end of the book and I was like, that's just what I call atheism.
Hmm.
Um, and so, there's a lot of, in Christian apologetic circles, there's this whole endless debate about, well, who has the burden of proof? Do you have the burden of proof as somebody who's trying to say there is a God, or do you have the burden of proof to say there is no God? Um, so to be fair, if we're to totally step back from everything, strictly speaking, I am an agnostic.
Hmm.
If we're talking about, is there a higher power? Broadly speaking, then I don't know. I have no idea. Um, but the reason why I prefer the term atheist is because I think colloquially, agnostic has the connotation of being undecided or wishy-washy, maybe.
Sure.
And so when a Christian hears agnostic, it's like, oh, well, maybe he's on the fence about the claims of Jesus of Nazareth. And no, I'm not on the fence about them. I've decided that I don't believe that he was the Son of God. I have made how would you want to say it?
There's a
Like,
positive assertion.
right, there's a positive assertion that I have affirmatively rejected the claims of Christianity and
Sure.
rejected the claims of Islam. Um, could there be some higher unknown deity who's out there doing his thing? Um, yes, possibly. I also don't think that it's inconceivable to imagine a universe apart from God. Um, so there's that. But then probably the maybe the biggest reason is because I'm of the persuasion that if there is a God, it's not possible to know anything about them.
Hmm.
And that's kind of a contentious philosophical, theological claim that I'm happy to hash out. Uh, but I think that, Christian apologists, kind of the William Lane Craig stripe, they'll jump from uh, the Kalam cosmological argument to the ontological argument to the teleological argument, and then jump down to Jesus, and Jesus as the revelation of
Yeah,
this God who's
the bridge between,
right,
yeah.
right. And I would say that that argument falls flat, or maybe not. It falls flat in so far as imagining that it can tell us anything about the nature of God.
Yeah. Yeah, there's what the terms for that are ichthyist, right? Or theological non something that's called theological non shoot. I forgot. It's basically the idea that if that the idea of God doesn't even really make sense. Like
Hmm.
it's all sort of just metaphor, and it's all stuff that really doesn't, when we talk about the Trinity, for example, or all
Right.
powerful being, or an omnipotent, omnipresent being, like we're really just sort of using words to explain something that we can't conceptualize.
Sure. Sure.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I don't know, I've got skepticism about that idea generally,
Mhm.
but I think the reason that I asked the atheist versus agnostic question is because you tend to combine this idea of atheism with nihilism, and you're saying
Right.
that you know, there is no God, and you know, there's no real purpose in life either.
Right.
So
Right.
if I get the sense that if you were serious about sort of like a higher power or just a, you know, a more amorphous idea of God, maybe
Mhm.
like, you know, good vibes or whatever, um, then you can kind of ditch the nihilism if you wanted to. But since
Yeah.
you're sort of claiming both of those, I get the sense that any possibility of God or higher power is really negligible in your thinking.
Um, I'd have to think that through. Yeah, I guess, if I could say there is a God, um, there's sufficient reason to believe in a God, and there is sufficient reason to believe that this is his nature, and that that nature establishes an objective good and evil, then that would
Mm.
be monumentally huge in my life,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
That would um, ground my actions, or not my actions, but my reason for wanting to be compassionate, right? If you say that the nature of God is compassionate and that the nature of God is what constitutes goodness, right? It is the
Mm.
the compass that points true north, then that would be huge.
Yeah.
Um, because for me as a nihilist, I don't believe in objective morality, unfortunately. Um, and yeah, I don't believe in any sense of um, transcendent value or transcendent moral duties.
Yeah. Yeah. Every time you talk, I can think of like 1,000 different directions that we can take this in. But I think so I actually sort of um I'm empathetic towards the idea that we don't have a lot of sense of what God is, and sort of, you know, the naturalists who use that as an indictment.
Right.
Are you a naturalist? Would you say you're a naturalist?
Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Um,
and I feel the need to throw a caveat in there. I was thinking about this. Actually, my church audits made me wonder about this. What would I say to somebody who criticizes me and what I do, and they say, "Well, you just came into this church to criticize it. You were never truly open to the possibility of our doctrine, our religion, our sect,
mm,
our cult being
yeah.
true."
Uh-huh.
I just went to a Jehovah's Witnesses Kingdom Hall this past Sunday and the Sunday before that, and I'm going back tomorrow. So
Oh wow.
that's kind of one of those questions that I'm anticipating is like, well, why would you come to this place just to rip on it if you, had no hope of believing it? And I want to make very clear, I don't think that the Jehovah's Witnesses are true. I think they're, from a Christian
If you're
standpoint, they're
gonna, yeah, if
heretic.
you're gonna pick one, right, you gotta
Yeah.
pick a better one. But
But it's like, have I made my decision? Yes. Am I open to changing my mind? Always.
yeah, yeah.
Like, I don't think that there's any claim that I would be totally barred from accepting. And so I think that sometimes um, when I say I'm a naturalist, a Christian might say, "Well, that explains why you're not trustworthy with your interpretation of reading the New Testament, because you have a worldview that,
Presupposition or
yeah, your presupposition mandates that you can't believe in a miracle." And it's like, well, not really. I mean, I don't believe in miracles, but I'm open to changing my mind.
yeah, yeah. So again, every time you talk, I got so many different things I want to say. I'm trying to keep this train of thought going though. So like I said, I'm actually a little bit sympathetic toward that. Um, because I think, especially since, you know, the Enlightenment, you know, Descartes on, you know, 1500 on, we've really amplified the significance and the import that we put on rationality, I think far beyond where it deserves to be. And I think that there's a lot of things that can be sort of parsed about the world through things other than rationality. I think intuition, emotion, sorts of things that resonate with beauty and moral goodness. I think that all of those are vectors by which we can understand the world. And I think that sometimes those things will actually be at odds and there will be true paradoxes. And I'm okay with paradoxes. And the reason I think that there are paradoxes is because I don't think that man is the measure of all things. And so you might look at our world and say, hey, like we got a lot of stuff that we can understand about our world. But I think that to say that we can understand everything is to make the assertion that we are the highest order of being. And so the Christian philosophy sort of negates that. You know, we may not even be the second highest. You know, I mean, depending on your reading of Hebrews 1, we might be the second highest, but there are other things kind of going on around, principalities and angels and divine realms and God himself.
Right.
And so if you look at sort of these orders of being, like, you know, just like mineral being, like it just sits there and doesn't do anything. And then you have life, you have plants and then animals, and they have some sort of consciousness, and then mankind, and we have another level of consciousness. Like each order of being sort of doesn't comprehend what's going on below it. Like my dog knows that I'm here. I don't have a dog, but my dog knows that I'm here, but like it doesn't really know the stuff that makes me different from it.
Yeah.
And so if there are levels of being higher than us, then there are going to be ways of understanding that are beyond our understanding. And I think that that's true. I think that there are things that we can't possibly comprehend. And I'm not just talking theological truths. I'm talking about even very basic things. I mean, consciousness might be one of them.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I'm very sort of nervous when Christians start talking about rationality as if they are trying to play the same game as, say, a naturalist. A naturalist has to understand the world rationally, or on the flip side of that coin, they have to say we can't understand anything. And they might say both. But a Christian, I think, has to say most of the stuff we're not going to understand. And so because of that, I think that I'm sympathetic to the idea that God is mostly incomprehensible. When God talks about himself, a lot of times he's using metaphors, you know, stuff that we, oh yeah, like, you know what a king is, you know what a shepherd is, you know what a farmer is. So here's like some stuff that I'm like, you know, and I think that comports with my understanding of what the world is like, a lot better than what a strict naturalist would try to tell me. So I guess that's just to say, I'm sympathetic towards those who are skeptical or you know, outright don't believe and say like, oh, we really can't understand it. And I think, yeah, we can't understand it, you know, and that's all right.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, let me try to hash this out a little bit. I think you're absolutely right that, like, if there is a God, you know, he will forever be beyond our being, right? Beyond our understanding. And I'm always really sympathetic towards like the apophatic tradition, you know, describing God by what he's not. So, you know, God is father, God is not father, God is not father. That whole thing is really puzzling and beautiful. But so I want to, I feel though, take a basic truth about the universe, right? the universe is big. That's a claim. Maybe it's a pretty nebulous claim, but like that's kind of a true or a false claim depending on your scale. But it's one of those claims that I will never be able to fully comprehend, right?
Sure.
But the gist of the truth, that's totally within my grasp.
Yeah.
So let's use your example of, the dog in your kitchen that's not there. But instead of a dog, let's use an ant. I mean, just, a frame of reference that is so exponential. And so you have an ant who is trying to comprehend you and your 86 billion neurons that you have between your skull, between your ears. And, that ant is trying to make sense of you and your ways and how complex your world and interactions are. And it's impossible. Like an ant could never fathom how great and mighty you are in comparison.
Sure.
But even the ant would have the ability to basically deduce whether or not you're there. So maybe it's a question of like, can I ever fully wrap my mind around the idea of a transcendent God? Oh no, of course not. Um, could I ever come to a conclusive answer, a satisfactorily conclusive answer about does God condone rape? I think that that's not too much to ask for. That would be a something that I would hope and imagine that we could use our um, rational faculties to come to a conclusion on.
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the things that I've been thinking about, this is actually um, the topic of of the next novel that I'm trying to write,
Hmm.
is as we get closer to, we don't have to hash out whether it's possible or not, but as we get closer to artificial intelligence,
Yeah.
I think that's the sort of parallel, the sort of analog that would really be more helpful toward our relationship with God.
Hmm.
Should an artificial intelligence be possible, we're talking about different planes of existence now.
Right. Right.
And so the way, and I think I used to believe that if we ever created artificial intelligence or artificial life, that it would be a real nail in the coffin for Christianity. It would be trouble.
Really.
Like, well, we could do it. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So it's not that special. But the more it sort of fleshes out in our world, the more I actually think the exact opposite. Like if we create not brains, if we create minds and
Yeah.
sentience and stuff like that, well, that only proves that you need minds to make minds, I think,
Right. Right.
if it proves anything.
Hmm.
But so I kind of like, I kind of, and I, yeah, sort of playing with these ideas of where we kind of sit in reference to other things,
Hmm.
kind of helps me maybe just to be humble
Hmm.
and to limit what I presume to know. And that's the other thing. I think that we use our senses,
Hmm.
and as a sort of extension of our senses, we use tools, and
Yeah.
as an extension of those tools, we have methods, we have scientific method, and we can kind of figure things out. But that really only serves to understand matter,
Hmm.
or at least, you know what is analogous to matter, if you want to think of light and waves and stuff like that. But
Right.
it's really this plane of existence, and if there are other planes of existence, we don't have the means
Hmm.
to get to those in any sensory way, in any way that might be measurable. And I think the interesting part about it is that that's almost something that a naturalist and a theist can agree on, is like the number one, the limits of what we can
Hmm.
do. But sorry, I just got distracted by a fly that was flying around.
I'm watching it in your webcam,
I
and I
know.
wish I could get you one of those like salt shotguns.
Yeah, I thought about slapping at it, but I don't know. um Okay, so the limits of we can know. Oh yeah, that's what I was saying. It's like whether you believe in God or you're a Christian or you're a theist or whatever, or you're not.
Mhm.
Um, there's two kind of ways of coming at limits to our understanding. Yeah, you saw it
Mhm.
fly across the front.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
what are you gonna do? So as a Christian, the one basically that I explained, right? I explained that there's higher orders of being and we can't comprehend them, and I
Right.
think Christians would do well to remember that. But as a naturalist, I mean, the clear problem is that we have really no sense of whether our brains are actually fit to understand the world as true false claims.
Yeah.
Um, and so we could just be, we're survival machines in that case, and our brains do a good job at keeping us alive, but they don't do a great job at understanding what's true. And those two things could be very different. So
So I want to I'll interrupt you there because
yeah, go ahead.
that's one of those points that I've heard that brought up in like several by several smart people and in several like it comes up in philosophy, it comes up in apologetics, psychology, and I'm not super persuaded by that. And maybe I'm missing something, but the whole argument to me just seems kind of silly that like, oh, our brains are good at constructing realities that are good at keeping us alive, not good at telling us what's true. Uh, but to me, that seems like just wrong, at least to an extent, right? So, like, um, if I if my brain does not alert me to a very real threat in the real world, then I might die, and
Sure.
that mechanism in and of itself is a pretty good indicator of what's real because I'm still here. My brain has so far kept me alive to keep thinking and avoided every major catastrophe. Um, so I mean, as far as false positives and false negatives, right? If I'm driving down the road and I see a cliff right in front of me, um, if that cliff isn't truly there, um, that's stupid for my brain to do and that could put me in danger. Or if there is a cliff there and my brain doesn't tell me about it, then I'm going to die as well. So my brain has a very clear incentive for telling me what's true, um, even down to like numeric things, right? Well, is there one lion or are there 10 lions? My
Sure.
brain has an incentive to like accurately calculate that. Um, it gets a little bit more complicated when you start talking about hope and how your psyche, um, uh, interprets that or processes that. So it could be the case that um, that hoping for a certain thing is more likely to keep you alive, dangling the carrot in front of your face to keep you going. Um, so fair enough, but if I were to say, let's imagine that my son is lost at sea and I'm trying to go and find them. My ability to hope that he's okay and to hope that he's still out there is more likely to get me, more likely to bring about me actually finding him than if I just give up hope. So hope is
Sure.
good for survival in that
Sure.
sense. But if I were to say like, well, I hope he's still alive while I'm at his funeral, that's not really a thing that we see brains do. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. What I think that to argue that your brain has the capacity to assess the world around it in a way that keeps you alive
Mhm.
is what you're claiming, right? More
Yeah.
or less.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think what the broader point is that there's likely not everything that exists is relevant to your survival.
Right.
And assuming that let's just assume like an evolutionary perspective, we're sort of as basic creatures, stuff exists and it's seeable. So eventually, you know, we get this little photo sensor and we can see light, and then we can move toward the light. And eventually you
Right.
can know those things get developed and you're able to sense better and more keenly. But you're only going to be able to sense sort of materials and scenarios that are relevant to you.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm saying is I think that there's no reason to assume that other things aren't there that we're not privy to simply because they're irrelevant to our survival. Yeah, just to use this, you know, an outlandish example, you
Mm-hmm.
know, when we walk and we see ourselves moving from one position to another position,
Right.
you know, in reality, if we're actually walking through a bunch of little portals, you know, and sort of locomoting in a way that doesn't feel like this, or if we're, you know, when we fall asleep, we're teleported to another location, whatever it might be,
Sure.
like
Sure.
presuming that that doesn't affect our day-to-day life, it's not going to be intelligible to us in that, um from that perspective, from that worldview, I guess. I don't know if that's a good word.
Mm.
That things that exist in our senses are going to be relevant to our survival. And I guess we sort of see that as we look at bigger things and smaller things, and as people start to think about um different theories of physics that seem a little outlandish to us. Like the
Right.
world is going on in a way that's not what we see, but what we see is good enough for what we're doing. See what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah. I think maybe the way that I've heard it pitched though is that like, well, you are incapable of even grasping the basic fundamentals of life and reality because your brain is not optimized for truth seeking, it's optimized for survival. So, if I were to say I'm sitting on a chair right now, well, how can you know that that's a true statement because your brain hasn't evolved to be able to determine
Sure.
truth values about
Yeah.
chairs or
I don't
something
think
like that?
I don't think that's necessary, but I think as you get to higher order thinking and, you know, metaphysics, for instance, which, you know, may or may not
Sure.
exist, um, then we have then that's a worthy contention, is that, you know, we wouldn't be sort of in that realm. We wouldn't be
Sure.
comprehending. And I think that, you know, I think that a scientist, or a naturalist maybe, might even use arguments like that, like, hey,
Mhm.
like weird stuff's going on and we don't get it, for
Mhm.
some things that are hard to understand. I mean, there are claims out there, sort of modern documented miracles, where, you know, someone's super sick and then all of a sudden, you know, instantaneous healing.
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
I think someone that's skeptical toward a deity might say, hey, like, you know, maybe there's some interplay between different dimensions, or interplay
Sure.
between, you know, things are going on behind the scene that we just don't understand yet.
Mhm.
And
Are you charismatic, by the way?
I'm not charismatic, but I'm
Okay.
definitely I'm chill with it.
Mm. That's
uh
fair.
yeah, I'm like a semi cessationist. I think that
Semi-cessationist. Okay.
I coined that term just now. It's more like, I think that there are credible examples of the sort of Holy Spirit miracles, that sort of thing,
Sure. Sure.
in places that are analogous to the early church. For instance, missions fields and stuff like that. I don't see any reason why spiritual warfare might look different
Mm.
in those sorts of.
So let me ask a theological question about that because I was kind of ruminating on that this morning. What would be the theological reason why God, um, apparently, it seems like, has not allowed a clear-cut miracle to be recorded on TikTok?
So you're basically saying, like, why don't we have, um, you know, rock solid proof of a miracle? Is that your basic?
Um, Specifically like video evidence. I think
Uh-huh.
that's what I'm getting at. Um, the reason why I don't believe in Bigfoot is because of the argument like, well, if Bigfoot existed, then we would have footage of him by now. I mean, given the number of cameras and deer cams out in the woods, it's like inexplicable that we don't have footage of Bigfoot that's
Right.
not on like a 2002 Nokia flip phone.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I just to sort of preempt this conversation with what I was saying a little earlier, like this is sort
Mhm.
of getting into the realm of apologetics where I don't
Sure, sure. And if
like,
you want
and
to
no,
detour,
I'm
we
not saying,
can.
I'm just saying like what I fear is that someone you will ask that question and
Mhm.
I will give an answer
Yeah,
that satisfies me, right?
right.
And then someone else will hear that and be like, that's a crappy answer. Like, wow, you know what I mean? And then
That's fair.
that ends up being so I think what I would say about that is clearly there's two things. Clearly, God has not wanted his followers to come about, his church to proliferate based on sights and wonders.
Mhm.
It's if the Bible has one thing to say, it's that that's not going to work. You know, God does all this stuff in the desert and makes really important points to say, hey, these people still aren't believing. These are
Right. Right.
hard-hearted, stiff-necked people.
Mhm.
Throughout Jesus's ministry, he does all this stuff. The Bible's very careful to say, we still don't believe. We're going to
Mhm.
kill this guy. So even like a parable like the rich man Lazarus,
Right.
he's like, hey, just go back and tell my brothers if someone comes from the dead, they're gonna,
Even if the prophets.
yeah. And he's like, no, it's just not gonna work. So in that sense, I think that that's not sort of the way that it works.
Mhm. Mhm.
um but I also think that to in circumstances where I think miracles are possible,
Mhm.
I think they're generally pretty personal. And I also think
Hmm.
that they're generally pretty in the context like I was talking about, like missionaries in Africa and stuff like that. They're
Yeah.
in the context of a spiritual worldview that's more
Mm.
amicable to those things.
Yeah.
So I mean, and again, like, what do I know? But I have friends who are missionary, who have families that are missionaries in Africa, and so I'm good. Like third person now, my friend's grandpa is telling me all these stories about this stuff that happened to him. The witch doctor emerges from a lake and just like does all this crazy stuff, and like clearly stuff that the people of that place were, it wasn't weird to them. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
This is
Mhm.
what witch doctors do. They live under the lake. Like for us, it would be weird because people need to breathe. And so in that context, he's saying, oh, there's things that we were able to do through the Holy Spirit to combat that
Mhm.
spiritual force of darkness or whatever. So, in those places, we don't have cell phones, I guess. I don't know. Um, I also think that there's probably some good sense in if there are spiritual powers, especially dark spiritual powers. I
Mhm.
think that there's some good sense in not manifesting. You know what I mean? Like they're doing pretty well. They
Hmm.
don't need to show us that they're there. But I think in certain places that they do. It's just kind of what works best
Mhm. Mhm.
for them in that time, I guess. But I think that even with sort of anecdotal, anecdotes of like people who are into the occult
Mhm.
and people who, like I said, like who travel to these places that are more keen on that sort of thing, I think that you can get a lot of testimony
Mhm.
that you really just have to, if you don't believe in miracles, you just have to say that those people are liars,
Right. Right.
or hallucinating or something.
Mhm.
But I'm just more inclined to say that they're not lying and that something happened.
That's fair. Yeah. And I guess yeah, to sympathize with that, even as an atheist, I wouldn't say that, nothing happened to them. I think I get kind of uncomfortable with how often I hear um, atheists say like, "Oh man, in this video they're just paid actors." Uh, Kind of my case in point for that is like the Benny Hinn stuff,
Oh, sure.
um, where he's zapping people. Um, those people aren't faking it. Even in
Right.
some of these like viral TikTok videos of like exorcisms, there's some
Mm.
like TikTok exorcists, which is really weird.
Yeah.
Um, but there's some of these people are like, writhing on the floor, foaming at the mouth, and the pastor asks them like, "What is your name?" And the guy's like, "Beelzebub."
Yeah, yeah. I've
And
seen stuff like that. Yeah, sure.
those people aren't faking it.
Sure.
They're not faking it. They're not paid actors. That is a real thing that's happening. Um, and I think that atheists are not just atheists, but I think that people are kind of, yeah, too accustomed to like clickbait, to like recognize like a very bizarre phenomenon,
Sure.
that I take seriously from like a psychological perspective.
Right.
Um, I mean, spoiler alert, I think it's a very bizarre, like psychological, interpersonal kind of thing that's happening there. Um, but it's still real in a sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I think this might actually be a good springboard into another idea,
Mhm.
because one of the things that, if I remember correctly, that sort of drew you away from Christianity was looking at supernatural claims in the ancient world
Yeah.
and sort of contemporaneous claims that were happening in
Right.
the time of Jesus, shortly thereafter, claims about
Mhm.
Jesus, claims that are, uh, those sorts of things.
Mhm. Mhm.
And one of the sort of, I'm just starting this study, which I'm really excited about. Um, the things that I've been thinking about recently is I think Christians have done a disservice by counting those out as
Mhm.
legitimate supernatural claims. Because I think that if you ask a Christian, this is like a super atheist trope, like, oh, you don't believe in Zeus, but why do you believe in Jesus?
Right. Right.
Well, I don't believe in Zeus in the way that a maybe an ancient Greek would have believed in Zeus, but I'm
Mhm.
not beyond thinking that Zeus did something, and that it was supernatural. And so I
Hmm.
think that if we take those claims seriously, there's actually a really compelling case to be made for other supernatural events in the ancient world.
So when you say that Zeus did something, are you making a claim that like, oh, it was a demon, in the guise of a deity named Zeus?
I
Or
wouldn't even go as far as demon.
okay.
I'm reading, and so I might totally butcher his ideas, but this is kind of what sparked it, because I'm not done with the book. But
Mhm.
Michael Heiser,
Mm-mm.
he's kind of trending. He just recently died, but
Mm.
he's sort of trending now in certain circles, and
It's a good way to
he
go trending.
yeah. Well, I think that kind of helped him actually, but
It always does. I mean,
yeah,
dying is great for book sales.
that's how I found out about him, and his view is really interesting. It's called like divine council theology,
Hmm.
and basically it's that there are many gods. It's not polytheistic, but it's that God created a bunch of gods, little g Elohims,
Okay.
and sort of he uses the Tower of Babel story and
Yeah.
then another parallel passage to say that God set the nations according to the number of gods. And so
Okay.
there are different gods that are overseeing the different nations. And he took Israel for himself, which is why Babel happens in chapter 11 of Genesis.
Hmm.
Abraham happens in chapter 12. So now God's like, I'm not working with the nations. I'm working with Abraham, and I'm working with the people that come from Abraham, Israel. And so his contention, and this is actually really interesting because there's a lot of like anti-Christian polemics that's saying like, oh yeah, Christianity is just like Canaanite religion and Yahweh was just a storm god. And I think that that is information that might even be synergistic with this idea that God, that Israel was taken out from these nations and God revealed himself to a group of people, and all of these other gods are still doing stuff. You know what I mean? There's a reason that the prophets of Baal took Elijah up on his challenge. They thought that Baal was going to come down, he's going to light the fire. Like they believe that. There's a reason that the Egyptian magicians were able to do all the stuff that they are able to do. Like if we start, I've heard so many, fundamentalist type Christians that are like, no, that's all fake. Like the Baal, it's either demons or it's not real. The magicians didn't really do it. They were just, playing around. I think the magicians really did it. I think they really turned some water into blood. They threw a snake down it. A stick down and turned into a snake. So when you enter into that worldview, which I'm still kind of thinking about myself, it really changes the way you think about all these other claims. And the one that really struck me, because I studied Plato more than anything else, and the one that struck me like as incredible that I'd never thought about this before. Are you familiar with the story of Socrates at all?
A tiny bit.
Biography. So Socrates, his whole, I'll use the word ministry, his whole ministry kind of kicked off when a friend of his went to the Oracle of Delphi. Right. And the Oracle of Delphi was a pretty significant staple in Athenian religion. And the Delphic Oracle said, go tell Socrates, there's no one wiser than him. He's the wisest. He's the wisest man. And Socrates was like, that's not true. Like, I know lots of people that are wiser than me. So he went out on this quest to find someone wiser. And so he went to, politicians and rhetoricians and craftsmen. And what he found out was that while he didn't necessarily know more than everyone else, he knew what he didn't know. He knew that he knew nothing, basically. And this is like super well attested in the ancient literature. It's in Plato, in the Apology. It's in Xenophon's Apology. It's then referenced later on from sources that we don't have by Diogenes Laertius in the 3rd century, by Plutarch. Like the idea that this oracle said this thing about Socrates is as undeniable as other historical events. But the interesting thing about the oracle and Socrates is that Socrates, arguably, if we take Jesus out of the picture, I think, is the most influential man in the history of the world.
Sure.
He influenced Plato. He influenced Aristotle. In turn, Alexander the Great. He was the reason the Hellenistic schools came to existence. That's the Sophists, the Epicureans. Later on, the Gnostics.
Right.
Think about what Aristotle did in the medieval period, in the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. I mean, even in Christian theology, Socrates kicked it off. I mean, everything that we have in the West today is because of that one moment in history, right? That one oracle, that one pronouncement. And so, if you're and the other interesting thing is, like, people look at the Christian texts, and they'll talk about Jesus, and they'll say this is a mythicized account. Time passed. The disciples kind of, Jesus was a cool guy. He had some cool teachings. He really died. Right. And as people sort of developed this religion, they kind of just added some stuff. They added some miracles. They added the resurrection. They added da-da-da-da. That claim can't be made about the Delphic Oracle, because Plato is a contemporary of Socrates. Aristophanes is a contemporary of Socrates. And so is Xenophon. And so you have 3 people writing about him before he got famous, before he was important, or, before he changed the world, for instance, There's like those accounts, and those accounts have no reason to add that. because they're not making a supernatural claim. They're just making a claim about the biography of the guy. And so I think there's a good reason to believe it happened. And I think based on the impact that it had, there's a good reason to believe it has a supernatural sort of origin. And so sorry for rambling, but
No, you're fine. And just to clarify, I mean, you're saying that the oracle that he received, and also what was the form of the oracle? Was it like a message? You know, was it a scribbling written on a pearl inside of an oyster? Was
yeah,
it a
yeah, yeah. So
prophetess?
I still, yes, prophet, it basically a prophetess. You know, I'm. This is like a brand new thing for me, so I'm just putting the pieces together in my own head, and I need to do a lot more research on the oracle itself. But as I understand it, there were women that were basically, I don't know if they were drugged or what, but they people would come and they would basically give these sort of cryptic messages.
Sure.
Um, and there are other examples of the oracle doing things. And people, you know, at Athens, when they were in the Peloponnesian War, they consulted the oracle. And so there's
Right.
other, you know, this is not the only time that the oracle has been sort of credited for something happening or them doing something. But I just think that the impact that was caused from that seemingly inconsequential statement that, you know, to anyone else, Socrates would have been like, all right, yeah, cool, like I'm the wisest man alive, like that's great. But I mean, if you look at the way history unfolded, I think there's a compelling case.
Hmm. I guess my and I don't mean to be a contrarian or shut down an idea like that. To me, and I take this as an example of somebody who grew up in charismania. So, you know, there's the Christian equivalent of the oracle at Delphi, and that is just words of knowledge, right? And
Yeah, sure.
prophecy. So, you know, in the same way that an oracle told Socrates, hey, you know, you are the wisest man alive, like, oh, that, you know, the sense of grandeur that that has to it, right? You know, the beginning of a quest to find somebody wiser than him. It sounds very, you know, impressive and incredible, but I have to wonder how much of that is just due to hindsight, due to survivor bias, and how many other untold thousands of people were told similar things who didn't make it into the history books, right? Um, Myself included. Just to tell a story because I think it's really funny. Um, I was at and if I here's what's going to happen. I'm going to tell this story, and either you or somebody in the comments, if this video gets posted, is going to say, like, well, no, it's true. Like what? Um, and so I'm willing to put myself out there and disclose this anyway, with the hopes that people will be charitable with this story that is deeply personal to me. So I'm like 14, 15, and I'm at a crazy, you know, charismaniac church out in South Carolina called Morning Star. It was a Todd Bentley service. Uh, Todd Bentley is famous for, he's got a video on YouTube where he's on stage and he's like, God, why won't you bring revival to this city? And then he's like, and then the Lord spoke to me. The Lord spoke to me as clear as day. And he said, because you won't kick that woman in the face.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that.
That guy. So that guy was leading this meeting that I was at. The story goes that he actually kicks this woman in the face and like knocks her out, and then God brings revival for some reason.
Yeah, as he's wanted to do.
As right,
Just waiting for that to happen.
I wish that was like the secret to all miracles. Like, shit, all I got to do is kick some single mom in the face. Like, terrible. So I'm at this meeting, and randomly, this woman like singles me out. And you know, there's probably 1,000 people in this little church, and she singles me out, and she's drunk in the spirit, right? So she's tripping all over herself, and she's like, "Whoa, man, whoa! I just feel like the Lord wants me to pray for you." And So I'm like, okay, well, cool. And, you know, being a young, impressionable 14, 15-year-old, you're like, attention, yay. So she puts her hand on me and, you know, hands all over the place and it's crying, sweating, doing all that. And she's like, whoa, whoa, God has such a plan for your life. Whoa, you can't even believe it. You can't even imagine it. Whoa, it's like you're the chosen one. Whoa, it's like you're Anakin Skywalker.
Oh
Whoa.
no.
And one that arguably ruined my life. Um, talk about
Yeah,
a
you
thing
gotta live up to
not
something. Yeah.
not tell a child. But I share that example to say like I think that there have been a lot of interesting oracles told to people throughout the centuries that end up not being true. And if that oracle given to me ends up being true, it might entirely be a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
And you know, maybe there's something magical and mystical and metaphorically true about that. Um, Also, I have to finish the story. I don't know that this woman had like finished the Star Wars trilogies, like the prequels, and
Yeah,
so she
because
was like,
that
"Oh,
gets,
Anakin's the
yeah.
good guy,"
Yeah, that
and
gets
then
kind of dicey.
I just imagine that like a month after she gave that prophecy to
She
me, she goes
watched the next.
home. Yeah, she watches like episode 2 and she's like, "Oh,
Oh
fuck.
no.
Can I hunt that kid down and like get his phone number?"
Well,
Too late, Queen. Too late.
yeah.
Um,
So
and I also have to beat anyone in the comments to the punchline, like, oh, well, you know,
now you're an
Darth Vader
atheist.
had yeah, like Darth Vader had a deathbed reconversion. Um, it's like, okay, cool, sweet, yeah, it's destined. It was given to me by a
Who knows? Yeah.
who knows, who knows.
So yeah, I think that, well, that kind of, that's a different offshoot of a different conversation. I think that you probably have had experiences that you chalked up to God,
Hmm. Hmm.
probably very visceral experiences and very real feeling experiences.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I just don't love, even as I had struggles of faith and I was thinking about, what would I do with these things? Like the only fair option is to sort of retcon those experiences and say, they just weren't really what I thought they were. And so I'm not, I thought they were something at the time and they're just something else.
Right, right.
And I guess one of the things that I'm very careful about is not letting, this is going to sound bad, but not letting rationality dictate other elements of experience. Experiences for instance, like beauty, like you could easily turn beauty into nothing. It's just like something's
Right.
going on in my brain, and it's there's nothing there. It's just a
Yeah.
mountain, it's just a sunset, it's just a song,
Yeah.
whatever. And I feel, I use the word feel in this context because it's definitely more appropriate. I feel like there's, if those elements of life are telling us something, and you can say that they're not, I think they have just as much sort of import as to how I should orient myself than pure rationality. And so like I just don't like one coming in and sort of usurping the other in an unhealthy way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if you want to respond to that, but I was going to get back to the
Yeah.
other, because I
Go
think that
ahead.
I think you've made a good point in that there are surely many oracular experiences. Likely the oracle at Delphi, the oracle of Apollo, had sort of better credentials than the lady at your church. Um, possibly not. The Oracle of Delphi has not seen Star Wars. We know that, but I don't think that you have to necessarily, one, you don't have to accept every example,
Mhm.
which might go without saying. But at the same time, I think that you can, as someone would ask you to do for the New Testament miracles, like you can look at the texts, you can look at the implications, the context, and in the case of Jesus, I think it's the significance of what happened, and assess, I'll use the word pagan miracles, and have a reason to believe that they may have happened. I guess I'm just saying, I haven't done enough research really to go 10 toes down on this one, but
Sure.
I just think it's a different way of looking at the world that I haven't even thought about for a long time.
Yeah,
And I think it's worth considering.
that's fair. And again, I don't want to uh, be uncompassionate and crap on an idea like that. Um, Especially one that gives people hope or enhances um their sense of awe for the beauty and the mystery of the human experience, right? um to me, I mean, just to give an example of the ancient world, I don't know if I brought this up on Victor's podcast or not. um did I talk about Polycarp at all? Did I
I
mention
couldn't
him?
say. I don't know.
All good. Well, as long as it's fresh to you then.
Yeah.
So um this was another thing I was thinking about this morning. Um, in the Martyrdom of Polycarp, beautiful document, beautiful, encouraging Christian document that every Christian should read. Um, he's got this line in there that still makes me tear up, where he's like, 86 years I've served my king, and he has never betrayed me. How can I betray him? And it's just like, that's so good.
Yeah.
Um, so historically speaking, even atheist, secularist historians are pretty confident that Polycarp was executed, that he was martyred. Uh, and this document says that he was burned at the stake. I don't know how confident secular scholars are about that, but let's assume that
Sure.
that's fine. Um, there are portions of the text that start to get into maybe speculative, maybe embellished territory. One is that he has a dream preceding his execution. He dreams that his pillow is on fire. And it's like, well, maybe, or maybe that's a really good narrative element that the author included because it adds some suspense and, gives him kind of an elevated status as somebody who's prophetic,
Sure.
right? So there's that. Um, then he's burned at the stake, and it's sort of like every second of his experience of being burned at the stake just becomes more and more spectacular,
Okay.
with it culminating in, he's being burned alive, and his body is just like not consumed by the flames. And so the Roman guards are like looking at each other and they're like, I guess we stab him. So, you know, famous line. So they pierce his side with a spear like they did with Jesus, except in this case, they pierce his side with a spear, and a live, literal dove pokes his head out of the wound and goes, "Ah," and soars away. And that's wild. And I also I have to, say that I respect um your position on this, at least taking these seriously and saying, well, maybe it did happen. Because I think for Christian apologists, it feels like special pleading
Right.
to say the miracles in the Bible, categorically, absolutely did happen. The Gospel of John, we can be positive that that happened. But the miracles or the accounts in the Gospel of Philip,
Mm-hmm.
the Gospel of Peter, probably not.
Right.
Um, so I respect that. Let me ask a qualifying question then. Are there ever instances in which documents or accounts are embellished by false miracles?
Like anywhere?
Anywhere.
Yeah, I would hope. I
Okay.
don't think it's possible that that every account of every miracle would be true.
Okay. Okay. How would you go about distinguishing, or would it even have any relevance or bearing to you, in the case of the martyrdom of Polycarp that I just mentioned? Would it have any bearing to you whether or not there was a real dove that shot out from his side?
Would it,
Would it
I
have any
don't think
relevance to you?
I I don't think it would have any relevance to me, no.
Okay.
Think so. Now, do I think a dove shot out of his side? I don't think a dove shot out of his side. Probably not.
Okay.
But
Why?
I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to it having happened. I just don't know. I guess I would be agnostic towards that.
Okay.
Um,
So the reason why I bring that up is I will press you on this though, because I want to make sure that it's not special pleading to stories that are very, deeply cherished and held, both,
sure.
New Testament miracles and the Oracle at Delphi. Those they have the air of some level of plausibility to them in some
Right.
instances.
Yeah.
But then, in Matthew's gospel, right, where Jesus is raised and then the tombs of the surrounding area pop up and there's just random zombies walking about. That has the ring to it of something that sounds a little extravagant, a
Sure.
little spectacular. And also, why did none of the other gospel writers mention that? They all mention the curtain tearing in the
Right.
temple, but they don't mention like random zombies walking about. That's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
So what would your methodology be for saying, well, one of these happened and one of them didn't? Or would you just say, like, I don't know, it doesn't interest me whether or not it truly happened?
Well, I wouldn't say it doesn't interest me. That's the big problem with textual criticism in general, or apologetics in its sort of, I'll use the word nuance, in its nuanced form of textual criticism, um, is that you kind of have to like what I would have to do to answer your question is like study the text first, but more than anything, study what other people have said about it. There are, I'm sure, many. You got a 27-second
There we go.
countdown. Do you do it? All right, sweet.
Mhm.
And so I would have to sort of go about all this possible answer gathering and say, oh, like this sort of makes sense. This answer kind of makes sense. This answer doesn't. All in the service of, this is like this is just honest uh, answering, all in the service of bolstering the reliability of the text that I already believe is reliable. So does that make sense? You're just not
Could you
feeling the answer.
could you explain it one more time?
Yeah. So what I mean is, and this is like sort of the problem I have with apologetics in general, is
Mhm.
that I have this preconceived understanding that the text is reliable, right?
Okay.
And I
Right.
come up against something that I'm like, oh, that's weird. Yeah, you're right. Like bodies coming around. That's kind of
Yeah.
weird. So I can go and I can see what other people have thought about it. I can see what the ancient texts, modern apologists, and
Sure. Sure.
I read those texts and I say, oh, like this is plausible, and I come up with an answer that makes me be able to be like, okay, that makes sense.
Right.
Like
Right.
that's sort of what apologetics is at bare bones.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a good use of that, in
Mm-hmm.
that, you know, I shouldn't come up with one thing I'm uncomfortable with and then just throw everything out. Like, that's probably not a good idea. And I think likely if that happened to me time and time and time again, well, then I should reconsider too. But as far as like one rogue thing that I'm like, I don't really know, I
Hmm.
don't really know. So like the fundamentalist would say, hey, it just happened. The Bible said it happened, and it just happened.
Right. Right.
I in that particular, I've heard people talk about, you know, it's a way of explaining, it's a way of saying something else, you know, it's a metaphor or something
Mhm.
like that. But I don't love having to do that.
Sure. Sure.
So um
Hmm.
I just don't.
Okay.
But
So you're not a fan of the Petersonian interpretation?
does he have one of that particular thing, or just in general?
Just in general,
Yeah, it's sort of making it a little like mystical, or maybe not mystical, psychological. That sort
yeah,
of thing.
or that it it rings so true to the human experience
Oh
that
yeah, it's like
that's what
truer
makes
than
it true.
true. Yeah.
It's like, it's like a truth inception.
Yeah. Yeah. So um I was gonna say something though about, because you were asking about miracles.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah. Just to kind of cap off what we were talking about with the oracle, there's a really interesting parallel text in the Bible, and I assume you don't know this because I didn't know it, and not that I'm uh the standard of what people know, but in Acts 16, Paul is going about, he encounters a woman,
Mm-hmm.
and that woman has a spirit of some
Right.
sort. um Acts 16, where are we at, like 16? So I'll just go find 16. um
Pull it up too.
16, yeah. And so it says they are met by a female slave who had a spirit by which she predicted the future. That is the NIV. Let's go to like NASB or something. Let's go to a real translation. um 16, here we go. Yeah, slave girl having a spirit of divination. Okay. The Greek actually is, I have it here, spirit of Python. Bet you didn't know that.
Spirit of Python.
Python.
Interesting. So
And
she was a coder.
yeah, yeah,
Haha.
that's right. Yeah. So the interesting thing, that spirit of Python is the Pythian oracle. It's the oracle. It's the one of, I mean, you can't say it's the exact same thing, but like the same oracle I was talking about in Socrates is the person that Paul encountered, and sort of exorcised that spirit. And the reason I think that's so interesting is because as Christianity was coming up, and this
Hmm.
is another one of my sort of backings, the reason that I believe this, as Christianity was coming up, the pagan world was freaking out. They were like, why is no one, I mean, even there's some indication of that in Acts itself. They're
Yeah.
like, you know, why is no one about, you know, Artemis, great as Artemis of the Ephesians? Or there was a guy named Julian the Apostate. Julian the Apostate? I think Julian the Apostate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, who was basically trying to get the ancient world back on the pantheon of, you know, the Greeks and the Romans. And his writings and other writings indicate like something's not working. Like this isn't happening anymore. Like the power that we had in our gods is going away.
Hmm.
And it's just so interesting. And I think that also sort of answers some of the question that I was talking about earlier, with these miracles waning in these places where Christianity has come,
Hmm.
um, in that the pagan gods have been disarmed. You know, they're not, their power is waning, it's going away. And so like there are ancient texts that sort of confirm that they're questioning, they're puzzled as to why their gods aren't doing anything anymore. And I don't know, I just find it so interesting.
Yeah, that's almost like a weird argument for like universal cessationism as opposed to like
Yeah,
continuationism. So
sure.
like that I will hand it to you that like cessationist arguments generally, um one of my Christian friends, I told him the other day, like, yeah, the argument for cessationism I think is stupid. And I won't say that about like many, positions or ideologies, but I just thought like cessationism was stupid. Side tangent really quick because it's a fun story. My there was a guy who was kind of acting as like our school chaplain my senior year of high school, and I was the student chaplain. And he pulls me aside one day. He was a graduate from Liberty University, and he was like, "Hey man, just this Pentecostal stuff that you got going on, and speaking of tongues and miracles, like that stuff stopped with the apostles." And so I was kind of conflicted on it. And so I went to my mentor, who was my Latin teacher. He's still a dear friend to this day. And what did he say? He was like, "What the hell did he tell you?" And I mean, he was red in the face with
Wow,
these
yeah.
deal of like, "I'm gonna speak in tongues, and you're gonna you're gonna
Yeah, I'll
you're gonna
rebuke
do
that spirit.
miracles." And oh man. But all that to say, the cessationist argument has always struck me as kind of dumb. But your uh spin on it, of it being like, no, it wasn't just uh yeah, the apostles made it stop, but there was some kind of shift in the cosmos at that era that caused. Maybe that's not what you're saying.
Yeah, no, I think you're getting it, what I was trying to say. And I also think that sort of explains why there may be still, spiritual gifts and miracles of that sort in places where that transition hasn't happened.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I don't know. I hope to write something up or maybe do a YouTube series on that idea because I
Yeah,
think there's something there.
it's definitely interesting.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
I had a question for you that might be a little bit of a curveball, but it sounds like it's right up your alley. Um, would you consider yourself a Platonist?
If you asked me that a couple years ago, I would have said yes.
Okay, okay.
Um, it for many reasons. I very believed a lot of Plato's ideas.
Hmm.
Um, Less so now, but I think I've still held on to a lot that I think is really significant.
Sure, sure. Um, yeah, I guess. I mean, do you have any kindred spirits with like divine conceptualists? You don't strike me as a gunkist.
No, no, I really, and even like even as far as the sort of philosophical roots and shoots and stuff, like I'm not even very well versed in any of that.
That's
Like I
totally
just
fair.
I just read Plato. I read a lot of Plato. I don't even read like commentaries or anything. I just read the Republic 12 times and
Wow,
that's it. Yeah.
that's impressive.
I don't know if it's quite 12, but a bunch of times.
So,
Um
how do you make sense of objective morality?
yeah, so I'll follow Plato there pretty tightly, I think that morals in and so this isn't a sort of polemic. I don't know what the word is. I'm not trying to convince you because I
No,
don't
no, no,
think I
no.
can, but I'm just telling you what I think. I think that morals have real being. There's
Mhm.
actually something somewhere that is truly the thing that I am trying to approximate in my own actions.
Right, right.
So I believe that morals individually, each individually make up a part of that thing, sort of Plato's form of the good. Um, And as you align yourself with various virtues, you are more aligned with that good thing.
Right, right.
And so yeah, so I'm definitely
Okay.
like a virtue ethicist. Um, and
Is that what I'm always hazy on the terminology. Is that what you would call that um
well, no. So the virtue
passion?
ethicist sort of has is sort of removed, as far as I'm aware, is sort of removed from like the metaphysical underpinnings of sort of Platonic idea of morals.
Hmm.
But it's just the idea that that there is something that is virtue, and you're trying to align yourself with virtue.
Right, right.
So in different circumstances, virtue might look different. Which
Sure.
is like sort of like uh, you have these moral paradoxes like the trolley problem, and
Right.
they really mess with utilitarians, for instance, because they pit your idea of not wanting to hurt someone with the idea of helping the most people or whatever.
Hmm. Hmm.
um, but a virtue ethicist would sort of not be able to answer one of those questions, because the virtuous action is what a virtuous person does in any given moment.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. That'll be something that I'll have to revisit when I'm older and wiser. Um,
Well, it's I I think I follow sort of, well, it started with Plato, I think, but then it has this kind of cool like track through a lot of Christian theology. I think Jonathan Edwards
yeah.
and C.S. Lewis has this, where, and I think that there's some good grounding in Genesis 1 and
Mhm.
2, where sort of like the image of God ends up being doing the things that God does and being the things that God is,
Mm.
insofar as it's possible. So as I align myself to the example that God gives, and also sort of like that dominion mandate, subdue the be fruitful, multiply, subdue the earth, and fill it,
Right,
that sort of
right.
thing, rule over everything. And then other sort of pieces that you can get from that text, like it's not good for man to be alone.
Mhm.
Community is one of those things, or um, God's demonstrating the importance of creativity, even.
Yeah.
Like all those things are good, and then they're proven to be good when their utility is shown. And I think that's important, is that I can
Mm.
ascribe goodness to an action, and then by my life being better because I do it, I can confirm that that's the right action.
Interesting. Interesting. Uh, hmm. Yeah, I'm just trying to think. So, I think that this was when this fell apart, for me, this was maybe the last straw in my Christian walk.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that this was the strongest point in my apologetic toolkit. Um, and also, once that collapsed, it's what led me to embracing nihilism.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, and I would also love like your take on if I'm using the right terminology to describe what it was that I believed. So I mean it's kind of Christian Platonism. It's kind of divine conceptualism. But the answer to the Euthyphro dilemma in my mind was well, is something good because God says it's good, or does God say something good because it's already good? Well,
God is the
false.
good.
God is the good.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
what would you call that? Is that um,
I'm not sure what the name. I mean, it's kind of like an offshoot of divine simplicity. Like,
okay?
God is these things.
Right, right,
God is love, for instance.
right.
Um, yeah, I don't know what the specific term would be though.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess Yeah, that was always just that was what grounded everything for me was that, well, murder is wrong because it is contrary to the very nature of God.
Sure.
God's nature is antagonistic towards murder, towards rape, towards inhumane suffering, towards all these things. Um, you mentioned the case, that like, well, we have confirmation that these things are truly good or truly evil because or truly virtuous was what you said. Because there is a benefit to your life when they are virtuous or something close to
Yeah,
that, right?
sure. Hmm.
Yeah. So this has been one of those like kind of troubling things for me. Um, and I think it was troubling for Job as well, right? Um, I'm living virtuously. Why am I not prospering?
Uh-huh.
Why do evil people get away with it? And why is it that sometimes being wicked is the thing that makes people prosper, or makes societies even prosper? Um, my friend was telling me about this the other day, and I just kind of can't shake it from my head. Do you know where we got the internet from?
Yeah, yeah, the Navy, wasn't it? Or
The
something like
Cold
that.
War. It was the
It was a
Cold War.
military thing, yeah.
It was missile defense technology. We were trying to, as quickly as possible, be able to communicate between different cities and say, hey, there's a missile that's been detected. So we just need like a universal computer system that can,
Yeah,
alert one to another.
sure.
Um, Social media has brought about a lot of crappy things, but the internet itself has done kind of wonders for the world. And that came about through a really crappy thing.
Yeah.
Um, and so I don't know where that squares in there. Maybe it doesn't, maybe it's not a problem at all, but I'm just kind of spitballing.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's squares. Um, have you read The Republic?
I think I've read portions of it.
Okay, because that is the Republic. The Republic is basically this. They early on in the Republic, I think book two,
Hmm.
they take this dichotomy,
Mhm.
and they're trying to understand justice.
Hmm.
And they say, Socrates, because he's famous for saying this, you say that justice is better than injustice. But
Yeah.
look at all these unjust people. They're doing great.
Mhm.
They're having a
Mhm.
great time. And these just people, they're not getting their cool stuff because the
Right.
unjust people are stealing from them. And so they polish up. This is the way that they phrase it in the Republic. They polish up these two statues. They have the unjust man who's perfectly unjust.
Hmm.
And in his perfect injustice, he never gets caught because he knows just how to be unjust. And
Hmm.
he gets all the rewards of being unjust. He gets all the money, he gets all the fame. He
Hmm.
even gets the reputation for being just because he's so unjust that people think he's good. He's so good at it.
Hmm.
And then they say, but now take the just man. We want you to prove to us that justice is good, only justice. So take everything else away from him.
Yeah.
He has his justice, but he's going to be miserable. He's going to be thought to be the most unjust person in the world. He has a perception of injustice. And on and on and on. You have these two beings, and they say, Socrates, if you can, make us believe that the just life is better than the unjust life. And I mean, the argument that he goes about is long and convoluted. In fact, the way that he does it is building a republic from the ground up. That's what
Hmm.
he's like. We have to do this in order to understand where justice fits in this republic. But I think that if you take the arguments from the republic and also sort of the broader arguments that Plato makes, I think, which square with biblical ethics as well, you find that justice, virtue in general, is good, even when bad things happen. Even for Job, who was a good guy
Right.
and
Right.
crap happened to him, it was still better to be Job. It was still better to be just.
Hmm.
Somewhere in the it was the Gorgias, I think. Um,
That's a name.
yeah, Yeah, it's another dialogue. I'm trying to remember the exact phraseology of it. Um, he makes the argument that it's actually better to suffer when you've been unjust, when you've been unjust, if you've committed a crime or something like that. It's
Mm.
actually better to be punished for that and sort of be purged of your injustice than it is
Mm.
to be than to get away with it. And I've I've anecdotally experienced that. Like I haven't done a whole lot of suffering, and I'm grateful for that.
Mm.
But I currently believe that even if it leads to suffering, I'd still be happier doing the right thing.
For sure. For sure. And I guess that's in a weird way, kind of the way that my ethics system works now. And that might be kind of an interesting overlap, or maybe even like a shoehorn phenomenon where we're like polar opposites and they almost meet at the
Yeah.
polar opposite ends. Um, so I mean, maybe I'm not totally understanding how that corresponds to an absolute good. Um, because, if the metric there or the methodology there is saying, well, it still is better to do the right thing. Well, why? Um, well, it's just the right thing and it makes you feel good.
So
Um,
I just want to quickly make a distinction between something like
sure.
that and deontological ethics,
Hmm.
which is like Kant, for instance, where he would say it's your duty to do it, therefore you must do it, whether it makes you happy or not.
Okay.
Um, and so I don't know. I don't. Maybe you weren't going down that route, but I don't necessarily think that that's what I'm proposing. So
Okay.
I'm not saying there are good things to do and you should do them. Bonus, it'll work out for you, I guess.
Okay.
I'm saying, and you kind of probably understand this from your former beliefs.
Hmm.
I'm more saying that when you align yourselves, let's just put it, in Christian terms, with the nature of God, when
Hmm. Hmm.
you then you're able to be more like the greatest good, and that is good to do.
Right. Right. Okay. That's fair.
Yeah, I think that, like I mentioned this a little bit earlier, I think that to hold to what you're holding, if I understand it correctly,
Hmm.
you do have to deny certain experiential inputs.
To an extent, yes. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, I think sort of along the lines of like what we were saying about religious experiences, like you
Right.
have to say that what significance you feel
Hmm.
in moral action
Right.
um, is illusory. It's not actually indicative of anything greater.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a great point. Um, let's take harming innocent people, for example. I feel that so deeply that
Yeah.
is wrong. That
Right.
is so objectively wrong. Being rude to your waiter is so inarguably and absolutely abhorrent.
Leaving
Don't,
one of those $100 tract bowl.
ah, bastards. I'll slap the Holy Ghost right out of you if you do that. Um, yeah, so I feel very deeply that that's wrong. And I feel so deeply that it feels inappropriate to say, well, that's just my personal preference.
Right.
It feels like it's transcendently wrong. It's, like um, a rule has been broken, a law has been, shattered, like in the same way that like a mathematical equation can be wrong, incorrect, improper. It feels like that's what is wrong here.
Yeah.
And you're right. I have to say, in my worldview, that sense is illusory. Um, that I want for it to, take on this much grander significance, like it's written in the fabric of the cosmos somewhere. Don't be a dick to your waiter. But I don't believe that it is.
Sure. Now, I guess the question that I have two diverging questions,
Yeah.
but we'll see if we can get to both of them maybe. Um, why? Why do you do it?
Yeah. So this is kind of an idea that I'm developing, um, that I don't have like a proper name for it. Maybe it's like dualistic morality, dual morality, double morality, something along those lines. I'll come up with a quirkier name for it that has like a Greek title in it somewhere. But um,
Oh, maybe you misunderstood. But I want to hear about it.
yeah.
So just finish the thing and then
But
I'll
you're asking
redirect.
why am I nice to my waiters?
No, that's not
No.
why what I'm
Oh,
asking.
sorry.
But I want to hear it though. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I'll remember.
sure. So um, I say that it is a reflex that I feel at a visceral level, that makes me happy. And, I'm a deeply empathetic person by nature, and I enjoy seeing other people happy. And that's kind of the end of it.
Sure. Yeah. I guess the question I was trying to ask is why. So you have these feelings,
Mhm.
strong feelings, strong moral inclinations, and maybe
Right.
even emotions regarding those things that you um, cognizantly,
Mhm.
intentionally um, deem insignificant the feelings.
Right. Right.
So why do you why like maybe this question's harder to ask than I thought.
Why do I deny that there's a greater reality tied to those actions? Or why do I
Yeah,
deny
I guess
that
what
it's
I'm saying is it doesn't follow that you have to be a nihilist. So why do you why do you do it? That's the best question I can ask. Um,
so maybe
oh,
I
here,
I
let
should
me
define nihilism, because I think that there's kind of, maybe this is what you're getting at, and correct me if I'm correct my course if I'm deviating off
sure. I
into
haven't given you a lot
uncharted.
to work on. Sure.
So with nihilism, we talk about it colloquially like, oh, he's really nihilistic. And Alex O'Connor likes to say, like, oh, well, is that just, our colloquialism for saying a person's depressed?
Yeah,
Fair
sure.
enough. I wouldn't define it that way. I think
Right.
that nihilism denies objective morality, and it denies a teleology.
Sure.
Um, it
Yes.
denies that there is a way that things ought to be. Um, Now, however you feel about it, well, I don't care. You can be super optimistic about it, which personally I think is kind of silly. Uh, like, if you're super excited about there being no hierarchy of morals or values, more power to you, I guess.
Right.
Freaking weirdo. But for me, it bums me out. But I don't think that there's a right or a wrong way
Yeah.
to be.
Okay. Yeah. So this helps because I agree with that definition, and I
Mhm.
do understand that that's what you meant. So are you familiar with the term doxastic voluntarism?
No.
Okay, so it's basically the question. There's two: doxastic voluntarism and involuntarism, and basically it's the idea that do we have power to choose what we believe?
Hmm.
Um, and so I would take it that you would be an involuntarist, that you can't change your beliefs um,
Um,
by force of will.
I would say that I'm kind of agnostic about that.
Uh-huh.
Because I do have kind of this sense of, um, I will willfully lie to myself if it's convenient or conducive to making me a better person,
Yeah.
and which I mean a person that I like more.
Right.
So, for example, if I know it to be the case that you just absolutely hate my guts, I might willfully lie to myself and try to actively change what I believe. And I say, no, 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 no. Matt likes me. Matt really cares about me. Matt is, somebody who I can confide in. And by lying to myself like that, which I'm not
Mhm.
lying like that, but lying to myself in that scenario makes me less apprehensive, which makes you less apprehensive, which makes this conversation better.
Yeah.
So there have been times where I'm able to kind of by force of will say, no, I am going to choose to believe in this.
Yeah, yeah. So okay, that's great. That helps because you're saying that you believe something that you don't want to believe. You don't like the idea. Like your worldview is not one that you would choose if you could have the
Right.
reality kind of play out the way that you would want it to play out. Okay.
Right.
You're and then you're also saying that you have attestation to the contrary by your nature. Your innate self is telling you that there is significance to your morals and that there is some kind of purpose or whatever, and you have to actively say that's an illusion. So
Mhm.
you have this strange situation where you're in a position where your beliefs are are not good for you,
Mhm.
and um and you've sort of admitted that you're willing to lie to yourself. So why don't you just stop believing these things?
Hmm. Hmm.
Especially because you're sort of baked into those beliefs, or that your
Yeah.
beliefs don't really matter. So there's no real significance to
Hmm.
whether. So I guess like from a Christian perspective, right? Like there's like if I don't believe certain things, there's a risk of an eternal damnation,
Right. Right.
or whatever. There are certain situations where like Pascal's wager or whatever, like
Mhm.
where you'd probably want to be on the right side of the coin on this. But for you, if things are the way that you say they are, and I've thought about this
Mhm.
for myself, like if I became convinced that God didn't exist, and there were times where I did question that,
Yeah.
I wouldn't do what you're doing, uh,
Hmm.
because I think there's this like I don't want to ramble, but I'll just say this real quick. I think there's this like heroicism that some people have that are like, this is just the way it is. Like I'm the hero because I believe the hard things.
Yeah.
But baked into all those ideas that you're believing is that it doesn't matter what you believe. So like why don't you just believe the stuff that makes you happy at that point?
Man, what a beautiful checkmate you caught me in,
Thanks.
because I really love sad stories.
Could be. I don't I've seen I don't know you well enough, but I've seen people that are just it's sort of like here like a martyrdom where
Yeah.
they're like I believe this thing and it makes me sad, but
Mhm.
this is my lot in life. Like I'm just and I asked one guy one time like why does it matter, similar, I mean I guess similar worldview, I don't really know exactly, but like
Right.
why does it matter, why use metric at I mean, I said that backwards. Why use truth as your metric at all at this point?
Right. Right.
Like, why not use utility or happiness or joy or whatever?
Yeah. And I want to say both. And so, in the instance that I gave where I said, like, oh man, Matt hates me. He thinks I'm a gross piece of shit. Uh, there might be a sense in which I say, that is, I know that I know that I know that that is true, but I'm going to try to ignore or suppress that reality. Um, and I think that is kind of how I live my life
Sure, practically, yeah. I mean, you
practically.
can't get out of bed if you really believe there's no purpose to anything. Yeah.
Right, right. So I mean, I kind of treat life as a game. It's a video game that I'm really enjoying and I'm still having fun with. Uh, but I believe deep, deep, deep down that eventually, the credits will roll and that's the end of it, and then everything goes black. And there's no significance or meaning to any of it. And I don't like that.
Yeah.
But I do like the gameplay right now. The graphics are really good. I mean, look at this shit. Uh, so I'm having fun um deceiving myself.
Mm,
So, maybe it's kind of both, and because full disclaimer, I love being an emo nihilistic sad boy. No ifs, ands, or buts about that. I think that it is um I think it's a fun, sexy archetype. And so that's very real to me.
mm,
I also think, that, like, well, why not lie to yourself and say that Christianity is true? Well, one, I don't think that Christianity permits that. Um, Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 says, if the dead are not raised, then we of all men are most to be pitied. And I have to take him up on that. Like there's some Christians who, like, they don't believe in the resurrection, they don't believe in miracles, they don't believe in the history of
sure.
the Testament, but they
Yeah.
say, like, well, but like, wishful thinking.
General
And
sense of, yeah.
yeah, and I think Paul says, no, if you do that, like, this is horseshit. Like, or maybe he's saying, the gospel demands so much of me that it would be foolishness for me to just believe it out of convenience sake. Maybe he's saying something like that. Either way, I think that he's right. Uh, so yeah, I mean, there is a sense in which I'm actively deceiving myself. There's a sense in which I know that I know that I know that the people around me don't have any worth or value. But I like deceiving myself into pretending that they do because it makes me happier.
Mm,
Now, the fact that I know deep down that I'm playing that game, that kind of bums me out. Now, maybe, there's kind of like weird complex layers, because maybe if I knew the fact that I know that I'm playing that game bums me out, and the fact that I know that kind of feeds into my emo nihilist boy phase. And so, yes, and to what you're saying, maybe.
mhm. So I guess to as an analog to that, if if for some reason I became convinced that the Bible's false, there's no
Mhm.
God, I just think there's so many other options
Mhm.
where I think nihilism, atheistic nihilism, is definitely one of those how you say cogent worldviews where like everything kind of fits together very nicely.
Yeah.
Um,
It's very
you,
simple.
you
Like,
can't, yeah, you
I've
really
I've
can't,
met so many people who are just shocked by, like, how simple it is. They're
yeah,
like, "Wait, so you mean you think you die and nothing happens?"
yeah,
It's like, how is that not like an obvious option to you?
yeah.
Like,
But I
out of all of the worldviews, like, surely that's got to be like one of the considerations.
sure, yeah, I was just thinking about that earlier. But let me just stay on one track here.
Sorry.
Um, no, no, it's fine. It's I was distracting myself. So it might just come down to personality type, really,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I would not, that would not be what I adopt
Mm.
in if I were in your shoes. And I just think that it's not fair for you to say something so deep seated in you is false just because it doesn't make sense.
Um, Elaborate a little bit more.
Well, I guess it's just something I've come around to a couple of times, is that you're saying, rationally, I believe that there is no God, and maybe God is the predicate for the moral significance in any worldview where you would have moral significance.
Right. Right.
But if you just started at the foundation that morality is significant because of the significance that you sort of innately feel it to have, well, then you can build a worldview even from that. You could have, it's not logical though. It's not a rational worldview, but it's definitely a worldview that that fits with reality.
Uh, it does, in a sense. Uh, the other counter that I might offer is, like, well, how much of it is just your personality affect, right? Your predisposition
Yeah.
towards being an emo sad boy versus being a, pull yourself up by your bootstraps versus just being a full-on optimist. There could also be the sense in which, well, my ability to be, a kid who wrestled with depression for, his teens and early 20s, that opened the door to, seeing things more accurately, less optimistically. To go back to the example of, like, the imagining that your son is lost at sea. Um, Maybe it's better for you to believe that he is alive, to be optimistic. Um, but then there's also the sense of reality. And so maybe if you were to do like a statistical analysis of, in that situation, who tends to be right more often, the
Yeah.
person who is optimistic or the person who is realistic, and well, in that scenario, the prospects are pretty dim, pretty grim. Um,
Yeah. I think I take some exception to you're saying it comports with reality,
hmm,
just in the sense that, and you must disagree, but I just don't think we can know reality quite so well to be sure. Like even in all the stuff that we don't know,
sure,
there could
sure.
be lots of things that that make,
You
just for
mean
morals.
supernatural things.
Yeah, well, whatever they are, I call them natural things if you want. I mean, that I just think that what this type of your position is predicated on the fact that we have all the pieces, that we know enough to come down on these things.
No, I mean, I certainly wouldn't say that. I mean, I think that I know the things that I don't know. And so I know that I don't know. Um, how do I want to say it? I know that I feel very deeply about certain moral absolutes, moral injunctions.
Mm,
Is it injunctions or junctions?
no, you're right.
Injunctions. Um, I feel very deeply about those. I know that I don't know where those come from. I know that I don't know uh, the which ones are truly right and truly wrong. So I could be mistaken about certain things, right? 200 years ago, we were mistaken about um, the innate worth of Black people, for example, right? Um, we're currently conflicted about the innate worth of animals. And, we want to assume that there is an absolute right or wrong. Um, so I don't know. I know that I don't know the answer to several of those questions, if there is an answer at all.
Sure.
And then finally, and maybe most damningly, is I know that I don't know how those questions could ever be resolved. And that's also why I'm comfortable being called an atheist, is because I can't imagine a scenario in which I am ever able to ascertain even the most basic information about a god, any god. Um, so take the crucifixion of Jesus, or I'm sorry, the resurrection of Jesus, for example. Um, at a basic level, what does that tell us about God? Well, like if you believe the entire Christian story that, well, he was prophesied in the Old Testament and Isaiah's suffering servant, and, this is the Logos incarnate in the man born in Bethlehem, died for our sins, rose again. It all makes sense if you contextualize it like that. But, really, 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 what does it absolutely, unwaveringly, inherently tell us about God? Well, we have to, it only makes sense if you look at it in a system. But if a dude just, rises from the dead, um, you were talking earlier about the possibility of there being multiple gods, little g gods, or the Gnostics would call them aeons, or things like that, demiurges, and then you get into angels and demons, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let's say that I go to Zimbabwe and I see a resurrection, but it's not from a Christian; it's just
Sure.
a witch doctor, right?
Yeah.
What happened there, and how do you know?
And what does it mean to you?
And what does it mean to me? Right. So the witch doctor rises a person from the dead and says, "Behold, my name is Zarathustra, and I am the true prophet of God." Well, how do I know that he's telling the truth? Well, he did a miracle. Well, how do I know that a demon didn't possess him to
Sure.
do the miracle? Right.
Yeah.
The problem that you have with the magicians in the book of Exodus. They're doing miracles, but they're bad people because they're possessed. Behind the curtain, there's bad people possessing them, making them do these miracles. Okay, so in the case of the resurrection of Jesus, is it the case that it could be possible that, well, actually, Jehovah didn't raise Christ from the dead, but Satan did, to deter God's people from continuing to follow the Torah? And Paul is actually the Antichrist, or whatever the Jewish equivalent is. So it's like, could that be possible? Now let's break that down even further. Let's say that God wanted to explain to all of humanity that that animal slaughter is wrong. He says, "Hey, I don't want you guys cooking cows and chickens anymore. That's morally important." How would he do that? And how would I know, as a human being with limited cognitive faculties, that it was truly from God and not from some other entity? He sends a meteor shower that spells in the heavens, "Please stop eating meat." Well, that sounds like something that Satan might do. How do I know? And the meteors, like, arrange, like, signed God.
Sure.
Well, but Satan's the father of lies. He's a crafty one. How do I know that that's truly God doing it?
Yeah.
And you kind of get to this like reductio ad absurdum, where it's like, well, even if Jesus Christ and 10 million angels, stood in front of me and said, "Behold, it's me, Jesus Christ, stop eating meat." But then you have Paul in Galatians saying, even if an angel of angel from heaven proclaims to you a different gospel, don't believe it.
Sure.
So I don't know how I could ever come to a confidence that that any of my moral presuppositions or my moral intuitions are grounded in God, and I don't know how God could ever make them known to me.
Yeah. What you said kind of reminded me of a recent Richard Dawkins thing, where I think he was quoting what's that guy's name? I forgot who, but yeah, basically saying like, even if these supernatural events happened, I wouldn't believe in God because I can't rule out that I'm going crazy, or I can't rule out aliens or whatever. And
so,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, just that, yeah, I mean, there's kind of a beautiful parallel there between like simulation theory and I don't even know what you would call it, like divine ambivalence. Like which divine figure is trying to make themselves known to you. So there's always, I mean, we are perpetually in a state of agnosis. it seems.
Yeah, I think the I don't know if I'd say response, but sort of the confusion that sort of talk brings to me is that what I think you're doing is imposing a sort of framework, like a very empirical, rationalistic framework
Mm-hmm.
onto all of life. And you're creating a criterion for belief that's based on absolutely empirical evidence.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
so that number one, I don't think that's the way that we actually live. I don't think practically we do that until we're sort of
Right.
thinking about it. But then I'll go back to, this is just my thinking. I think that rejects all the other sort of corroborative elements of our existence.
Hmm.
We're not just thinking machines. And so my sense is that sort of, in a situation where, God appears to you,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
like that's actually how conversions happen. Like,
Yeah.
should that happen to you in a in a magnificent sort of way, even if it's
Yeah.
just a personally magnificent sort of way,
Mm-hmm.
you've heard a lot of people getting converted in their
Mm-hmm.
bedrooms, oh God, just please save me. Yeah, I think Victor Borba actually has a similar conversion story. Like,
Mm.
you're not, if it's true and if it's actually happening to you and you're experiencing it, the veracity of that experience is sort of self evident. And I don't think that your criterion are going to apply in the event of a legitimate divine encounter. um
They won't, but then, what do you get with contradictory experiences? I mean, I think that's, at the end of the day, that's why I tend to lean more on the empiricist side. Um, because you have, like the cults that I'm investigating right now, right? The sweet daddy cult. Presumably at some point in his life, he had a deeply personal revelation and said, I am the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. And we have to say that's wrong. Like I want to be, charitable to people's personal experiences, but there's got to be sometimes where they're just wrong,
yeah,
and sometimes they're deeply harmful.
sure. I think so. There's this it's actually let me try. I have this analogous argument to the problem of evil.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it applies here sort of, in that you can only suffer for yourself. Like, I can't suffer for other people's suffering. I can't, I can look at really bad things happening, but that's not happening to me. And in the circumstances where something bad is happening to someone else, the context of that pain and of that suffering is known to them.
Mm-hmm.
So just, I'm not making a polemic on the problem of evil right now, but I think that's the
Mm-hmm.
exact same thing. Like, I can only experience my experiences. Like,
Right,
you can only
right.
experience your experiences. So I can't say what, these cult leaders are thinking, or what the experience of the Buddhist monks are. And I think my theology leaves lots of leeway for God working
Mm-hmm.
in those circumstances.
Yeah,
I don't want to pretend that that all of those are wrong de facto in every element of their existence.
sure.
Foreign religions and other ways that people have communed with God. I'm not a universalist, but
Mm-hmm.
I leave lots of room for God to work things out.
Yeah.
So that argument just doesn't strike with me, at least. I can my experiences are my experiences. I have to parse my experiences, and I can't be responsible for what other people have experienced.
Mm.
And I think that that's,
Mm.
that in a sense, it makes me want to experience more. Like I kind of want to have more experiences so I can,
Yeah.
validate my beliefs in those ways. But,
Mm.
I've, the funny things are like, people ask about sort of big, God intervening moments in your life. And I've got a couple. But if I told anybody, they would just laugh at me. Like,
Mm.
that's so insignificant. It doesn't matter at all.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
two of them were just a song playing. Just,
Mm.
I
Mm.
was at the grocery store, and some guy was playing a piano at Wegmans, and he played the song, and I don't know why. I just knew, God. That's all I
Yeah.
can say. I've had other sort of more tangible experiences that may qualify as like, significant, God actually moving things, not telekinesis, but like God orienting the world in a way that this happened.
Right. Right.
But again, those are my experiences. They're not going to convince you,
Mm.
and they're
Mm.
good. They, you know what I mean? They are what they are to me.
Mm. Can I give you some ammunition?
Yeah, sure.
Some philosophical ammunition?
Yeah.
So this is weirdly enough, this is a philosophical argument um, that I came up with after I deconverted. Um, but I hope that Christians uh, will employ it because I think it's really powerful. So everything that I've talked about up to this point, right? The a big part of the reason why I'm an atheist is because I can't conceive of a way in which God could communicate to me that I would be confident about his nature. Um, for the same reason that we can't rationalize our way out of the simulation problem.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea whether or not I'm a brain in a vat, and that kind of sucks. Um, so I got really wondering about the question of the brain in the vat, or am I dreaming, or is any of this real? And I think I found the solution, and I want to hear your take on this. Um, I think the only conceivable way in which you could be confident that you are not in a simulation, that you're not a brain in a vat, or that God has truly revealed himself to you, the only way that any of that's possible um, would be to know everything. So imagining,
Right. It's unfalsifiable unless you knew it all.
right. And in the case of Eastern Orthodox Christians, that is a hope that they have. Now, I don't think that's an argument for anything, but it is kind of a beautiful hope that they have that secularists and many other religions don't have, and that is to say, like, well, we don't have concrete evidence of a way out of the simulation theory, but we have a hope that one day we can, for certain, once and for all, know that we are not in a simulation. And that's kind of beautiful.
Yeah.
Like, W moment for y'all. And I definitely
Yeah.
think that Christians
I,
should brag about it.
I've thought about that actually. It's similar, like a different take on that. Like, you know, if I'm wrong, neither of us will know about it. Neither you nor I will know about it. But if I'm right, we'll know about it when we die.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know,
That's interesting.
so I can die not knowing if I'm right or wrong, and if I'm wrong, I'll just never know that I was wrong. It's kind of
That's
cool.
fair. I don't know if I spelled it out as clearly as I wanted to. I'm talking about the idea of theosis, right? Of becoming God. And I think that that's the only way out of the simulation theory is to become God, to
I see.
become omniscient and well, how do I know that I know that I know that I'm truly here and that I'm
Because you
not?
know it all.
Because I know everything,
Right.
because I have become one with omniscience itself. And I have, peered into every conceivable reality. And I, can say with 1,000,000% certainty, this is base reality. This is true.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I think that all the problems that you have, if
Mm-hmm.
I call them problems, we don't have to call them problems, but all the sort of dicey situations that you're parsing through are just because of your threshold of belief. Like it's too high. It's too high. You don't need to know it all.
Hmm.
Just be
Hmm.
okay with
Wow.
mystery, man. Um, were saying that, or something about it kind of set me off, and maybe this will be a good way to close. There's this. Have you read Brothers Karamazov?
No, it's been on my list for
It's
forever.
like it's the best book. It's my favorite book.
I tried to read it as like an audiobook, and
Yeah,
I can't
yeah.
do
It's
novels. Like,
long. It's long. You gotta
yeah.
kind of slog. I've done it audio. That's how I've gotten through it. But there's
Mm,
this parable in there. I don't know how it applies to you or me or anyone. I don't even know if it's true. But um, Ivan is he's one of the brothers, and he's sick, and he's got this fever, and he's seeing this devil, the devil, a devil. I don't know if it's Satan or not, and he is and the devil tells Ivan this parable. And the parable is about a man who dies, and he wasn't a great man, and he was sort of bound for a bad place. And God says, or maybe it's St. Peter, I don't know who says it, says, you have to walk 1 billion miles. And after you walk 1 billion miles, you're good to go. You can come in. And in the parable, he walks the 1 billion miles.
mhm,
He just, time is different or whatever. And he gets to heaven, and he praises God, and he
mhm,
says, you are good.
mhm, mhm,
And I think about that frequently, in that, there's so much stuff. There's so many confusions and difficulties, and if God is good, and I believe that, all things will end well.
mhm,
You know, and
mhm.
I don't know. I very much could be wrong, but I think it's a better way until then, in my opinion.
Mhm. Well, whether it's a knowledge to be confident about, or a hope to hang on to, I think it's a beautiful, worthwhile thought either way.
That's Yeah. That's why hope's a virtue, man. Hope is a virtue. It
Mm.
is. So yeah, we can close here, and it's been great talking.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hells
So
yeah.
we can cut it, if we do a recording or something, we can cut it here. That's great. But
Okay.
I had a good time.